It's your job as a leader to understand what someone might be mourning or having a hard time letting go of that makes it harder for them to cross the bridge quickly. So my most successful leaders work one-on-one with people and customize their approach to getting their person across the bridge based on what they need and their relationship to change.
Hey Team Lab listeners, welcome back to Team Lab, reimagining the way we work. I'm Corey, and today's conversation is for anyone who has ever felt like the goalposts keep moving and your team is sprinting just to stay in the game. Our guest is Suzanne Sitrin, a leadership and talent optimization expert with 30 years of experience working with leaders and teams across industries. She's also the founder of Blue Birch Consulting, and she spent decades inside the real mess of change, growth spurts, shifting priorities, and the human side of trying to perform while everything is in flux. In this episode, we get into what constant change does to teams, especially when senior leaders are ideating fast and the execution layers below are living with moving goalposts. Suzanne connects it directly to one of the biggest risks leaders are staring down right now, burnout. You'll also hear Suzanne's practical takes on why leaders can't assume everyone relates to change the same way, why private equity firms are discovering the value of team coaching in the face of mergers and acquisitions, and what it looks like when a leader stops trying to clone themselves and starts leading as a learner, not a knower. If your team is navigating shifting priorities, generational expectations, hybrid culture, or that constant sense of, are we ever done? I promise you're going to feel seen in this one. All right, let's jump in with Suzanne Sitrin.
Welcome, Suzanne Sitrin to Team Lab, reimagining the way we work.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Corey and I are very looking forward to this conversation with you. Suzanne is a consultant. She has decades of experience working with leaders and teams. So we definitely have that in common. The passion of helping leaders, helping teams. Your sweet spot is in creating cultures that help leaders and team perform and thrive. And that's where we're going with this conversation today.
Wonderful.
Welcome, Suzanne. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just to get us started, Suzanne, help us understand why leaders and why teams? How did you end up in organizations doing this work?
Well, I'll give the kind of short story, but when I graduated college, I thought I wanted to be in sales and marketing, and I fell into a tremendous opportunity to actually sell corporate training programs in my early 20s around leadership development, total quality management, which was all the buzz in the 90s. And I got a deep dive and like a master's level education in leadership and change management and quality management without even realizing it. And what it made me understand is that I was way more interested in leadership development than I was in the sales aspect. So I used it as an opportunity to pivot into that world. And I became a corporate trainer at a young age and then moved my way up to doing more internal consulting focused on leadership development. And while I was pursuing my MBA in change management and organizational behavior. And then upon graduation from my MBA program, I went to work for a large HR consulting firm doing a lot of overall kind of organizational design, system improvement, change management work. And it just allowed me to continue to build on that skill set. And then I took that and I opened my own practice with a business partner in 2003 and have been doing this work ever since.
So what came to mind for me is you definitely have seen an evolution, a progression, the workplace changing in the past couple of decades for sure. How is it changing now? And what do leaders and teams need to be ready for?
That's a great question. I think change itself is happening at a faster pace, I think, than it ever has before. I feel like I actually just wrote an article about this idea that organizations need to be really skilled at navigating change, not only from an organizational perspective, but from a human change management perspective, and really understanding one's own relationship with change so that you can help other people and support where they are as it relates to change. And you're probably familiar with the Williams Bridges change model and helping people across the bridge. I'm seeing a lot of that, and change has always been there, but I feel like the pace of change. I also feel like we've always had generational differences in the workplace, but for some reason there seems to be a heightened level of interest or understanding how to lead and manage people of different generations in a way that hadn't come up for me in my leadership work as much in the past as it is today. And the perception of there being so many differences that exist between the generations. And I say perception because we've always had this idea of different generations have a different lens they look at things through and whatever. And not everyone, we cannot purely label people by the generation they are a part of. But in my coaching conversations, I'm having a lot more conversations with leaders who are truly trying to understand how to engage people who may look at the world differently, or their what we call box of life is just very different from their own.
Yeah, and I think among those things that you mentioned, the way that the different generations are changing the workplace. New generations in the past used to come in and then, learn the tricks of the trades, learn the workplace, learn how to perform in their role. But that is changing. What we're seeing now is that, if anything, the workplace has to change to adapt to those new generations. And we saw that already with millennials, and even more so with Gen Z. Mm-hmm. So there's a shift. It's the workplace that has to be more inclusive of how these generations, what they bring, how they think.
Yes.
What is your experience in that? How can leaders, again, be inclusive and be ready so that they attract the talent and they retain it?
Yeah. Well, I always say you can fight it if you believe that someone shouldn't have the expectation they have or view the work world in a certain way. But resisting it is kind of futile, and figuring out how to adapt to it as a leader is really important. And that doesn't mean we can't be really clear about our expectations and drive performance cultures, but the conversations we have with individuals to help set those expectations are really important. They've always been important, but my observations of the younger people entering the workforce is what they want. It's kind of this balancing act. They want really clear expectations and they want to get regular feedback so they understand how they're doing at any given time, while also wanting flexibility, that there isn't only one way to get things done. And so the ability to balance those seemingly disparate things is really important for a leader. And to connect with each individual uniquely and create the relationship based on that individual is super important. And it's what I think is most contributing to building an engaged relationship between you and that direct report.
I love the idea of not peanut buttering your management approach, your leadership approach, because everyone is an individual, no matter their generation, honestly. That's such a good, just solid way to think about your employees and getting the most out of everyone and getting everyone to a job satisfaction, getting the team to work better together. Can you talk a little bit about maybe even a story, if you have one, from one of the teams you've been working with recently about some of this generational conflict, we'll call it, or what's come up and how you kind of solved it for them or helped guide them so they could solve it?
So I feel like I get the opportunity to have conversations about generational differences probably more in my one-on-one coaching, because I'll have a senior leader who's really trying to understand how to engage their team. So while I, in that moment, may not be working directly with the whole team, I'm providing pretty deep coaching to the leader on how to engage their team and how to meet people where they are. So I do a lot of coaching and helping people become much better at asking thoughtful questions, truly listening for the response, being open to changing your mind, being willing to recognize that even though you're senior, you may not have all the answers, and that you have to work on adapting the way you're used to doing things to meet someone where they are. But that being said, I'm also working with teams regularly. In fact, I've had an opportunity over the last couple of years to work with a lot of fast growing tech startups as they move into their next stage of growth through private equity investment. And so I'm seeing these teams really struggle with moving from founder mode to next stage growth and the expansion of a team. And I was just with a team last week where we had a really large swath of age differences, experience differences, and the senior leader acknowledged that he used to really be much more about command and control in his leadership approach, and that he was burned a bit by that approach and it didn't work. And also thinking he wanted a bunch of people like him and that was what defined a successful team. And as he's evolved and grown and worked with a coach and just had his own epiphanies about what it really does take to be a successful leader, this current team he's built out that I had the opportunity to be with next week is such an interesting mix of behavioral styles, communication styles, generational differences, approaches to solving problems. And he communicated how much he recognizes that a team of different people is the secret sauce, and that he's much more successful now than he was before when he would just try to replicate himself and really create everyone in his image.
Yeah, so common. You see that
Yeah.
so often where, like you said, just cookie cutter around the table. And it's like, well, they still have a lot of conflict and a lot of sticking points. And so that's awesome that he recognized that.
Well, I work with a lot of teams where the leader hasn't recognized their own need to grow and evolve to really create the culture they're looking for. And instead, they just continue to try to reinvent the wheel. And we started off this session with his acknowledgement of that. And I have to say, this was one of the more high functioning teams that I've been a part of. And the fact that he brought me in, even though they are a well-oiled team, just speaks to his kind of growth mindset. And that's to me what it takes to create the culture that you're looking for in an organization, for sure. And there was conflict, don't get me wrong, but it was the right kind of conflict.
What was their reaction to this change of their leader? How did they take it?
They talked a lot about it, how they communicate much differently than they did originally. That I noticed a very open environment. It's interesting because it was a technology leadership team. And so he warned me that there may be some skepticism. We started with a behavioral assessment. We had each person kind of explore themselves. Then we expanded out to understand how their styles come together to make up the team, what's working, what's not, what they need to improve on, so that we ended with like a commitment of actions and behaviors they all agreed to. I expected skepticism because they're techie people. They were just super open because he set the stage of really valuing and welcoming differing opinions, differing ideas. He actually stood back and said, before I offer my input on any particular area, I want to hear from all of you. He just created a really comfortable culture, and they articulated how much they feel things have grown and improved over time, given his willingness to be vulnerable and admit that he had growth to do and didn't have all the answers, even though he was a very seasoned leader.
In one sentence, for me, what that summarizes that is showing up as a learner and not as a knower. Kind of that shift of mindset. I'm here and I can learn as much from you or with you and not just know it at all. That small shift.
Absolutely. And that allowed for people to be real honest about, if you think about, we ask the questions, what's working, what's not. We ask it in a pre-work survey, the whole stop, start, and continue idea. And when people don't feel safe and they don't feel like the leader genuinely is interested, that is very obvious to me as an outside person coming in. They're willing to have the anonymous at times. Sometimes they're not even willing to put it in the survey, even though a name isn't attached. But even if they are, there's crickets when you actually get into the conversation and you're looking to expand on what the insight that came in the pre-work. It was very obvious to me that he created a lot of psychological safety because he welcomed the idea of talking about any opportunity to fix things, to optimize the way they work together. And they felt very comfortable being honest.
That is definitely a way to build psychological safety, meaning asking for feedback, asking for people what they think about the thing that they want to do, asking for input. What are other ways that you have seen in action that a leader can adopt to build psychological safety with their team?
So I know you're very familiar with Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions and this idea that we've got the pyramid and at the foundational layer is building trust, which I think is such an important thing, but also a very nebulous thing. It's like, it sounds good. Of course, we want to build a culture of trust. And yes, we know it's really hard to measure, quantify if we're doing that. And I had a team a couple years ago that was actually also a startup with 2 partners, and they were very different working styles, very conflict-oriented dynamic between the 2 partners, which created a really interesting team culture. And one of the leaders ahead of time, as we were doing the meeting prep, she wanted to create this super open culture. She actually introduced me to the trust equation, this idea of credibility plus reliability plus authenticity is in the numerator of the equation. And self-interest over collective interest is what detracts from it or takes away from it. She wanted to actually bring that into the meeting and have the team rate each other on each element of the trust equation, which I've never had happen before. The other founder partner was like, absolutely not. We're not ready for that. And that isn't going to work. And we ultimately didn't do it, but we did have a conversation where they rated themselves, which the difference. And truly what Lencioni talks about is the way we really do build that foundation of trust is the willingness to be vulnerable and to acknowledge where we have an opportunity to grow and where someone else has an opportunity to grow, and all in the interest of getting to a better result, right? And then by building that trust, which really is the psychological safety, then we can have conflict in a way where people don't feel threatened because they know we're mutually invested in getting to the right outcome. And I feel safe having disagreements because we've built that trust. So again, I bring up this example of the other team because the fact that the partnership at the senior level of the organization was broken, it made it very challenging to build trust. One party felt that they wanted to create the psychological safety by having open and honest conversations. And the other partner was felt a bit threatened personally, but also was worried that the team wasn't ready for it. So there has to be a readiness to be honest and open and create space for vulnerability, because that is truly how we build trust. And then when we have the trust, then we know we can disagree about approaches and it's not taken personally, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I have a question for you. In terms of as you're working with teams and people are contacting you or you're figuring out who to work with, if you have a team like this with a clear conflict and you've got someone who's really open and honest and growth mindset, but another partner within the organization is not Do you take on those clients, or how do you approach that?
If I had to do it again, Corey, I probably wouldn't have taken them on, in all
Okay.
honesty. I walked out of that session and I felt like I struggled to have the impact I wanted to have because that issue was so out front and center that how do you break through that to really have a viable outcome when that exists so pervasively? And so it's the same as I would say when I choose to take on a one-on-one coaching relationship. I always vet it out by saying, I don't want to work with the turnaround leaders where this is their last chance, and if not, they're out, because we're not going to have success with those. We want to work with growth mindset, high potential, successful leaders who recognize they have development to do, and they're equally invested in their own growth as the organization is invested in them. And I would say the same thing about a team. I'll work with a team that has dysfunction, because a lot of teams do, but the desire to get to a better place and the commitment and willingness to do the work that it takes to get there. And to me, I can get a sense of that by who the leader is. Because oftentimes he or she is all I'm exposed to initially. And then the only other way I'm exposed to the team is through their responses to my pre-work or to the behavioral assessments I have them do. So I have to get some of my cues from the leader because, as you all know, the leader sets the tone and cascades the culture.
Yeah, we have experienced those challenging cases ourselves. We have one point of contact, but they're not the leader in that team or in that organization. And then, you never go past that because the leader of the organization is not on board, like you
Right.
said. So if you ever, because I'm sure you had an opportunity, if you ever get in a conversation with those leaders that are not by your side yet, what are ways that you know that you can get that leader on board and ready to go to do the work? Has it ever happened?
For sure, because there's a number of different ways I engage with an organization. For example, as I mentioned that I'm working with a lot of private equity portfolio companies, the first point of entry is because actually the head of portfolio management of the private equity firm has asked me to come in when they take a new company into their portfolio, and he wants me to just kind of do a landscape assessment of the senior leadership team. So sometimes the CEO is like, who is this person and why are they coming in? But I will say I respect tremendously, as I'm sure you've all worked with PE firms, I know where you're based, that many PE firms don't really put an investment in the human aspect of an acquisition. So I respect, keep in mind, this head of portfolio management is a former CEO client of mine. He's taken me to a number of companies with him. So he's already bought in, which is great. So now a new company comes in, I'm meeting with the CEO of that company, but I'm introduced from the private equity firm. And then they invest with me a small amount, but just to give them an understanding of who's at the table of the C-suite team. But then they also know I'm going to share that back with the private equity firm. So then sometimes they're really into it. They're excited about it. Other times it's so personal to them because oftentimes they're the founder. And so I'm now coming in as they're moving to this next stage of growth and helping them see where there are gaps based on kind of where they want the business to go. So that will sometimes get them on board. If I ask them the question of like, what keeps you up at night? What are your pain points? They suddenly feel, and by the way, in general, I just ask more questions and I offer my own expertise anytime I engage with someone. Because let's be honest, people love the opportunity to talk and kind of share their stories, right? So if I go at it from that perspective and I ask what they're most proud of, what they're most excited about, and also what's keeping them up at night and what their pain points are, and then I build off of that, that helps them really buy into this more than just we're coming in to assess your leadership team, right? Like it's to help. I always label it as my job is to make your team run the best it can be based on what it is you're here to accomplish over the next 12 to 18 months. That's it. And so we are aligning on moving you forward. I'm not here to make any changes to take someone out of their job or do anything like that. I really try to create the least threatening environment possible and to align with them on something that's very actionable so they feel like it was a good investment of their time.
How can I help expedite? How can I help, get you there faster or better
Yes,
based on their business goals?
absolutely.
Ultimately, that's what moves them.
Yeah, and wouldn't it be interesting if they actually would call you in, Suzanne, before the PE firm made the investment to do the assessment? Because sometimes I imagine that the human component is so broken that they wouldn't want to
It's not worth making the investment.
fund,
Yeah.
not worth making the investment. Because I would love to know what that stat is, right? About
Yeah.
the success rate. If the human element, the leadership team has,
Yeah.
like you were saying, that self-interest culture first.
Even there may have been a time or two where I have been asked to do that, but I will say, as you probably both know too well, oftentimes the founder does move out of the leadership seat, and the recognition that this isn't the business they want to be in anymore, but they're still going to sit at the table. They're going to be on the board. And so it's a collective agreement that someone else may be better suited to be in the C-suite spot to take them to that next level of growth. And they come to that
Yeah.
decision together, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I want to go back to something that you said earlier about the adaptation, the speed to adaptation for the leader, for these companies that are in transformation. How do you help them expedite? How do they get there and they get there at the speed that they need when things work against them?
Well, I first try to frame it that we have to look at change through two different lenses. There's the organizational change model, which is based in biology and this idea that organisms must evolve or they will die off. And so it's typically in an organization's best interest to keep adapting and updating. And so it's our job as leaders to help people who work for us understand the organizational reason for a change. And all too often, companies and then the leaders within those companies don't stop and take the time to explain the business reason a change was made. Sometimes that's all a person needs, okay? Not always, for sure. So that's the first bucket. And the second bucket is then recognizing the human side of change and the human reaction to change and the fact that each person has a different relationship to change. So then it's my job to coach leaders and organizations on first understanding their own relationship to change. And, a lot of that is based on their behavioral profiles and other data input they can understand. Like there's someone who really appreciates change, they get bored, they want to move fast. They're agile and innovative. And obviously, a lot of these startup companies I work with, they're in what we call the upper right quadrant of that innovation and agility. They just keep ideating. And then as they grow, they realize, oh no, we actually have to execute on some things, right? So then we have to have people in place who can help us execute. But it can make all the sense in the world to make the change. You can have a really good relationship with change, but now you've got people who work for you and you can't assume they've got the same relationship to change. So it's your job to be an investigator and be curious to understand each person who works for you and what their relationship is with change. And do what we call, through William Bridges, help them across that bridge of change, right? And understand that some people are going to run across that bridge. It's when I describe it to people, I talk about, it's a very unstable, unsteady bridge, like a suspension bridge in a rainforest, right? So some people are like, bring it. I'm a daredevil. I want to run across that thing. And they're at the other side. And then they're like, why aren't my employees running across that bridge? It's so fun. It's so easy. It's so exciting. Understand the trepidation someone may have. And even the most exciting changes come with the loss of something. And it's your job as a leader to understand what someone might be mourning or having a hard time letting go of that makes it harder for them to cross the bridge quickly. So my most successful leaders work one-on-one with people and customize their approach to getting their person across the bridge based on what they need and their relationship to change. And by the way, the more trust your employee has for the organization and you as their leader, they may be willing to take that risk because they trust you, even if they're not fully comfortable with it. But because of the pace of change, companies they're so not transparent, and they don't take the time to communicate. And it seems so basic, but I've seen so many organizations forget that just because you were in the conference room, all those months of discussing a direction you were going to go in, an acquisition that was going to be made, a change that was going to be made, you've crossed that bridge while other people are still back at the beginning. It's actually what we call endings, and you have to step in their shoes in order to get them on board.
I love this metaphor of the bridge. It's so clear, I'm sure resonate with people who runs across the bridge, and then you turn around and, there's probably people hiding under the bridge. They don't even want to be on the bridge.
Well, that's true, 100%.
You got those people too. But what I loved what you said is, don't assume that your way of reacting to the change and your enthusiasm, if that's the case, of running across the bridge is shared by the rest of your team. And here we go again, to take the time to learn and find out where are they, because everybody is at a different edge with it. And how do you help each one?
Yes.
And taking that time or help or hiring the help, people like you that come in and have that focus and that focus only, because I know already the leaders that are listening to this is like, but I have that and then that and all my business results and all, there's so much that they're handling. And so someone like you that can go in and help them speed up when it's time to speed up, or stop or pause and slow down when they need time to do that.
Yeah,
So
and also
important.
recognize, and this team I was with last week is fresh top of mind for me, but you've got the senior leadership team who is always innovating and coming up with great ideas because they're still in that bit of a startup mode. But then I was with the team that's kind of the next level down, and the struggles they were having, even though they're a well-oiled team, they struggled with what they called the moving goalposts, and that it's hard. They're a team that wants to execute and achieve results and be thoughtful and methodical in doing that, but the goalposts from the senior leadership team keep moving. And it's the balance of, if I were like, that may not change completely, because that's the job of senior leadership, is to ideate to some degree. But my job when I'm working with the most senior leaders is to say, okay, but as you grow, you have to operationalize things, and you have to think about where is the best investment of our time, energy, resources. And we have to think about the people who are further down in the organization that actually have to get this stuff done. And we only achieve results through people. And successful organizations recognize, if I don't engage people and make them feel good about what it is we're here to do, they will leave, and I will have no shot of executing on these bold goals that we have as a company.
Yeah. Just to interrupt here, I was just thinking about the gap of knowledge, right, that's coming down to the people who are executing. However, if there were opportunities for them to provide feedback to senior leadership about what it means when the goalposts are always changing for them, like what is the cost? Because maybe senior leadership doesn't know.
Yeah, they don't. That's actually why I love the fact that this client wanted to take the time to really assess their team and the makeup of their team behaviorally and how they like to get work done, juxtaposed against the senior leadership team. I wish more organizations did that, because this conflict that arises isn't always within the one team.
It's the most disempowering thing when you put so much effort, you reach the goal, and then the bar has moved in the meantime. And so you feel like you're never there, that you're never achieving. This used to be the nature of the game in sales, spent years in sales. And it's expected, right? The quota is always higher. You never feel accomplished. But I see this becoming the norm more and more outside of sales organizations and engineering teams, and
Yes.
where, the quarter is done, and now the next quarter there's the new QBRs, the new KPIs, and there's never a time to pause and celebrate.
Right.
Like, we're not going to change the speed of the business, and we all know that. But what we can do is to, when the goal is achieved, when the quota is achieved, take the time to celebrate with your team.
Yeah.
Make them
Yes.
feel good.
Yes.
And then you move on, and then there's
Mhm.
the next, and then the next goal to achieve. But don't forget to make them feel good for the accomplishment of what they have done. Yeah, good
Yeah, and I
point.
have to tell you, the number one issue that came up in my conversation with this team, and this is not an isolated situation, is the risk, the fear of burnout, because things are moving at such a fast pace and the goalposts are moving. So 100% it's take the time. And we talked a lot about recognition and celebration and it being unique to each team in the way they like to be recognized and celebrated. So you have to understand that.
A lot of tools are needed. Leaders need a lot of tools if they're working in a hybrid model so that they don't have to maybe do the heavy lift themselves, but they are able to create rituals and norms, perhaps.
Yeah.
Have you run into that where teams have been successful with specific rituals or just celebrations or specific actions?
I, first of all, always say that you have to understand what each employee defines as the way they want to be recognized or what a team really values in the way they're recognized, and then try to meet them where they are. At the same time, we have to get creative. Still, like, I'm still a big fan of trying to bring teams together whenever you can. And I understand that not only the financial implication of doing that when people are spread across multiple geographies, but just also we're moving at such a fast pace and we have so much going on that we forget that it's, and we're just like, we just kind of run robotically almost in a way where we just get so used to a way something is done that we forget that we have to stop, or we forget that we have to schedule and block time to do those things. And I still believe that when you bring a team together, they get inspired and energized in a way that they aren't when they're just operating kind of alone in their virtual office, right?
Yeah. We'll have to have you back, Suzanne, because we're almost at the end of our episode. What are you most looking forward to in the future? What are ways of working, of engaging with these leaders and teams that you're looking forward to?
That is a great question. I think there is a lot. I get super excited about the opportunity to help leaders. It's so simple, but I feel like building emotionally intelligent leaders is such an important thing, an underestimated thing. And it's one of those things that's maybe common sense, but putting it into common practice. So I get super excited when I get the opportunity to work with a leader who wants to build more self-awareness. And then when they understand themselves, they also say, like, don't do the best job of staying composed under, in times of stress and pressure. And I want to be better at that. So I love when I get to work with leaders on building better communication tools. I say, and I think it's okay if we say what we think we're good at, right? Like, more people should. I do feel like I have a little bit of a superpower in helping people communicate their messages more effectively. I always say, you can pretty much ask for anything or say anything. It's clearly in the way you say it. So I get excited when leaders come to me with challenges in the conversations they need to have, or didn't go as well as they wanted to, or they know they have to have a tough conversation and it keeps them up at night. And I kind of take that on as a personal challenge. Like, I want to help you, because think about how much better the world would be if people were able to communicate their messages more thoughtfully and intentionally and authentically.
Thank you. Thanks for
Yeah.
helping us close on that note. It was a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. I
Great.
love being with
Where
you
can
both.
people find you, Suzanne?
So
Where
my
can people
company is
find
called
you?
Blue Birch Consulting, www.bluebirch.com, website, Instagram, LinkedIn, and I'd love to be able to help.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, listeners, that conversation might have secretly been a playbook in the subtle art of organizational change. If you made it this far, probably like us, you're still picturing that suspension bridge Suzanne Sitrin talked about, that beautiful metaphor that let us imagine how some leaders are probably sprinting across, some others will cling to the ropes, and maybe one or two quietly will be building a raft underneath. Suzanne didn't just remind us that change is human. She showed us that ignoring how your people feel about change is a liability, not a strategy. What stood out wasn't just the frameworks or the coaching tactics. There were quite a few in this episode. It was the small moment when she said, people go home at the end of the day and talk about you. They will talk about how they feel at work. And that's the kind of gut check most leadership books skip, but still is the heartbeat of real culture change. And it's what Corey and I at Team Lab most care about. So here's your move. If you find yourself wrestling with fast-moving goalposts, let's be honest, most of them are, or generational friction, or the deafening silence after you ask for feedback, send us your team dilemmas at info@teamlabatwork.com. That is info@teamlabatwork.com. We'll keep it candid, practical, and just a little out of the ordinary to help you move forward. And until next time, keep building the kind of leadership people want to talk about. Ciao.